In The Walking Dead No Man's Land, you get to take the characters from the show into battle against the undead hordes. Each one has a distinct leadership trait that grants them a unique bonus, or, if they're the team's leader, grants it to the entire squad. Some of these leadership traits are more useful than others, and here's my list of the best and worst of them. I'll go class by class, and I'm assuming the heroes being used have had their traits re-rolled to have the best ones available. I'm also assuming they're loaded up with suitable badges and have fully upgraded weapons and armour with decent traits too. And yes, I'll quickly cover all of those things after ranking the heroes of each type. Starting with shooters, bottom of the list is Tara. Her healing charge trait means you can restore health to damaged survivors when they use a charge attack. She rates as useless because at high levels, any attack from any opponent will cause the health bar to go straight to red, or, if it's already there, it'll kill you right away, so the traits simply never come into play. Next up is Carl. Second chance means that there's a percentage chance of not dying to an otherwise fatal attack. If you're already in such a dire situation though, it's unlikely you're escaping, even with a bunch of second chances. Carl does serve a purpose though. He is a superb leader for defensive teams in guild wars and outpost defense. Seriously, he is responsible for so many frustrated guild war players going full Rick during games and spontaneously screaming out, "Carl!" Merle and Aaron do something similar with their jackass and teamwork skills, providing a flat damage boost against opponents. You'll always be taking on higher level enemies, so the caveat on Merle's skill is moot. Merle's skill applies to any enemy. Aaron's is a slightly greater boost specifically against enemies who somebody else has already attacked. In both cases, that extra hurt is welcome, but it's hardly game changing, and with a few better characters to pick from, these guys are not really first choice picks. The protagonist of the show, Rick Grimes, has inspiration. It's an unusual skill in that you charge it up by getting kills. This has an obvious drawback. You have to already get kills in a battle to maximize the potential of this trait. It means that Rick is not an asset right away. However, when his trait is topped out, you get a significant damage boost and a chance to regularly gain charge points. So if you can get some momentum up, he becomes quite a killing machine. Hilltop Maggie has a somewhat circumstantial leadership trait. Keeping the peace grants a percentage chance to gain an action point after attacking a non-normal walker or human. Because most missions will have these, and they're going to be your greatest threat, keeping the peace does actually come in very useful. It's a low percentage chance of kicking in, but if you make sure that Hilltop Maggie and her gear have the lucky trait, and all of the survivors you favour should, she becomes someone that you want in your roster. Finally, the best in class is Yumiko. Firing Squad makes her an S-tier hero. When she shoots at a target, any other ranged survivor with range and line of sight does exactly the same. The chance to inflict status effects with each individual shot remains, as does the majority of the attack's flat damage. There's a top tier combo for the game, and Yumiko is one of the 3 members of that supergroup. The best traits for shooters include Lucky and Ruthless. I'm also a huge fan of Critical Aim and Marksman. That's probably a good choice for the 4th trait. Give shooters badges that boost damage and critical damage. A shooter's armor benefits from Lucky, Ruthless, with Charging and Primed also being immensely helpful. High Power is a literal game changer on shooter weapons, with Lucky and Incendiary, Cripple, and or Ensnare being tough to pick between as absolute top tier traits. Charging and Interrupt are definite nice to haves. My favourite weapons for the class include the Pulverizer, Savior Handgun, Flare Gun, and the Hunter's Bow, which lets you reduce threat. That can be pretty nice on certain missions. Scouts are the speedy up-close damage dealers, and while Carol is a legendary character in the show, her aim for the head leadership ability is not very helpful. It increases the chances of flat attacks being critical, but at high difficulties, you need to be using charge attacks to really make an impact. And the chances of scoring a critical is very low even with this boost, so she's got to stay on the bench. Gabriel's mysterious ways sounds pretty useful, giving a percentage dodge chance and being a sort of inherent lucky, boosting the chance for luck-based traits to kick in. These are only modest boosts though, and you should already have a ton of enluckening stuff on your most used characters. Gabriel is definitely at the bottom of the pile in this class. Glenn has a circumstantial trait, but it can be really handy in missions where, for example, you have a lot to search and not a lot of time to do it. Lucky Dumpster means that after interacting with an object like a crate or a door, Glenn may move and attack. Couple him with a weapon that grants an action point upon a kill, and he can zip around even the largest maps like he's back on his pre-apocalypse pizza delivery moped. Being able to go toe-to-toe with the undead horde is really useful, but being able to find what you need and get everyone to the finish line before the threat counter kicks in, before the walkers know that you're there, that can be even better, so Glenn definitely has his uses. Glenn also gets a percentage of his XP from kills as supplies, so team him up with Wifey and the Governor and you have a pretty handy farming team. Huntsman Daryl has a lovely skill, Prowl, that lets him run past a walker and not only avoid being grabbed, but to give him a sly poke for more damage than a standard attack would inflict. Coupled with a scout's natural speed, this makes for a lot of mobility on the battlefield, and that can help avoiding being cornered, funneled and surrounded, while simultaneously giving you the chance to fight back. It's a lot of fun. He also has a chance to sneak up on human enemies without triggering their overwatch, which is nice to have, but doesn't often come into play. Survivalist Rick has two fantastic aspects to his lead by example leadership trait. First, he inflicts significantly more damage with his charge attacks. Being a scout, they already cause a lot of hurt on a target, so you can wind up with truly deadly, devastating charge attacks. Secondly, upon using a charge attack, a charge point is bounced to a teammate. That can be a pretty huge deal, and each component of Throat Ripper Rick's trait would be good on its own. Together, it kind of makes him able to inflict massive amounts of damage when needed. I've not really used Connie. At the time of publishing, she's just become available. Better Together sure sounds like a gold standard trait. You could get charge points pretty regularly and have a pretty considerable amount of extra damage with each attack just by sticking together. Would that make her S tier, or is the sacrifice to mobility too much of an issue? It's tough to say just by looking at it on paper, so we'd have to do some playtesting to find out. Watch this space. Scouts benefit from having Lucky, Ruthless and Weaken. Perseverance is really nice too. You could load them up to be defensive, but badges that boost damage and critical damage make the most of a scout's natural ability to score hits that hurt. Traits like Lucky and Ruthless are ideal on armor, while Primed, Tactical and Hazard Suit are really useful too. Swift Strike, Charging, Disruptive, Interrupt, just about any trait can be useful on a scout weapon. Only Accurate has little value. Decide what you want your scouts to do and load up accordingly. Fave weapons, in my opinion, include the Sawtooth Spike, Ruby Reaper, Mercer's Axe, and the brilliant Bayonet Musket. Hunters have someone who is probably the best pound-for-pound hero in the game, but also several not-so-great members. Maggie's Harvest Red grants more XP per kill. That's nice if you're on a simple farming mission, but she doesn't actually help you kill stuff. You'll get greater rewards by being able to progress further in the game and actually completing tougher missions. Perceptive means that attacks made by Sniper Morgan on an enemy's turn cause additional damage. It's not really enough to make a huge difference, especially since you may not be making Overwatch style attacks, and relying on killing the enemy on their turn is just not a viable strategy. Sure, it was really effective in the show. What, too soon? but in game, this isn't a very handy trait. Dwight's Desperation is a trait name that doesn't exactly sound powerful and exude confidence, does it? Anyway, it's circumstantial and provides only a modest boost against specific enemies, and it's not really enough to make a difference. It's hard to recommend Dwight. Daryl is kind of the star of No Man's Land, and it's easy to get tokens for him. He's not very useful at the endgame stage though. He grants ranged characters an increased chance to deal critical attacks and for his attacks to not create threat. At high levels, the chances of causing critical hits are just minimal at best, no matter what you do, and having a fairly slim chance to attack silently is not going to make a difference, especially if the mission has no threat counter anyway, and many don't. Alpha and Herschel bizarrely have something pretty similar in their traits. We'll start with the former. Cold-blooded provides chance to move half an action point if you land a body shot. It also increases critical chance and reduces the possibility of landing body shots, which abrogates the movement bonus if that happens to kick in. It's kind of bizarre. Sure, you're almost guaranteed to get body shots at high levels, but her very modest decrease in that possibility is virtually guaranteed to not make a difference, and you kind of don't want it to anyway, because then you wouldn't get the movement bonus. It's a slightly weird self-cancelling skill. The movement enhancing aspect of the trait is actually done better by the old one-legged farmer. Was Herschel on the show famed for his incredible agility and amazing speed of movement? It seems so strange that an old man with a missing leg, no less, can move about the map faster than 90% of the characters, dancing around walkers like a parkour champ, but there you go. That's something that Good Enough does. Non-lethal attacks grant a half point of movement. This is guaranteed as long as you don't kill a target, so it pips Alpha's similar skill. There's also a percentage chance he will cripple the enemy he attacks, which is really nice. He oddly makes for a superb leader for melee teams because he can inflict Weaken, a close combat relevant effect on his targets. That, coupled with the aforementioned movement bonus, means that melee characters can easily acquire charge points and either kill or run away from their targets. It's a nice trait that makes for a lot of fun squad building options. Shane rolls into battle with explosive bullets. Kill a target and it explodes, causing a significant percentage of its total health to be taken from surrounding enemies, and it imposes a chance to stun them too. It can create chain reactions and can really inflict a lot of hurt on even the very toughest targets when it kicks in. Shane's one of the most fun characters, and his trait, it is useful. I would argue though that there are two characters in the class who are more useful. To get the most out of Guardian Carol, you need weapons that inflict status effects, incendiary, cripple, and snare stun, that kind of thing. All of the best weapons do that, so it shouldn't be an issue, and when you make an attack that does inflict a status effect, you have a chance to gain a charge point. You also get a chance to make a follow-up attack when you hit a target, inflicting a lessened percentage of the damage. So you have a good chance to charge up and make multiple attacks per turn. It's pretty handy stuff, but best in class goes to... Sasha's good out of bad really does make a dire situation into a game-winning opportunity. Body shots have a decent chance to grant charge points. At endgame type difficulties, you're pretty much guaranteed to land body shots with standard attacks. She is perhaps the most useful leader in the game, and along with Yumiko, is one of the members of the best overall team that you can take into battle. Hunters are always going to want Lucky and Ruthless as traits. Critical Aim and Marksman are certainly beneficial too. Badges should enhance damage and critical damage. Armour looks great with Ruthless and Lucky, with Primed and Charging also being very good. Weapons benefit from Large Caliber, Lucky, and Incendiary, Cripple and Ensnare, which provide a huge boost to their effectiveness too. Fave weapons for me include the Harpoon Gun, Festive Shotgun, and the 7mm Harrier. In the Bruiser class, Morgan is perhaps the least useful character. The incredibly boringly named Defensive Charge gives you a percentage chance of gaining a charge point if hit. Okay, but you don't really want to be relying on being hit, even if this class is the most resilient to taking damage. There are also a bevy of traits that can earn you charge points in a manner that you have control over, so there's not really a place for Morgan, except on the bench. Maybe sat next to his sniper iteration. Negan grants a damage boost to and damage reduction from the nearest enemy with Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo. It's a modest boost either way, certainly not enough to rely on. You're still likely to get severely hurt taking a hit at high levels, and certainly won't be inflicting a considerable amount of damage in return as a bruiser. That's not what the class is about, so Negan really shouldn't be stepping up to bat for your team. Eugene has the best named leadership trait in the game with mullet time. It even has an exclamation mark to make it more fun. Morgan, this is how you name a leadership trait. Anyway, mullet time kicks in upon being hit, granting a reduced chance to be stunned or critically hit. It's a pretty nice twofer, but I'm always of the opinion that you're better off having traits that let you do more of what you want to do on your own terms, rather than reducing the chance for the enemy to do what they want. If you're taking enough of a pounding for this to truly be of use, you're probably in a situation that's so dire, you're not really going to survive anyway. Riot Gear Glenn's Ready for Action gives you a pretty good chance to start with some or all of your charge points at the very start of a mission. Sounds like a pretty limited benefit, but you can do crazy things with charged bruisers. With weapons like the Riot Shield, you can essentially incapacitate an entire crowd of walkers, meaning you start with and can maintain the upper hand for the rest of the mission. You have to have the right team, weapons and strategy to make the most of Riot Gear Glenn, but he can be a mission-winning asset. T-Dog and Rosita can reliably get the most hits in, and that counts for a lot if you're looking to stun enemies and have the kind of traits that bruisers have in abundance that allows them to earn charge points from hitting things. When T-Dog's beat 'em up kicks in, he attacks a random adjacent enemy for a good percentage of his normal attack's damage. That damage isn't the important part, it's the extra chance to hit and therefore stun nearby enemies that's really nice. It stacks with Punish, which is a great bruiser trait, and throw in Weaken and Perseverance, and T-Dog is often fully charged at the start of each round. It's also just really funny. He swings around every turn like an insanely hyperactive 9-year-old at a piñata party, so that's kind of a bonus. Rosita's Fighting Fury makes her a pretty handy leader, gaining extra attacks on her own turn if she doesn't knock down what she stood next to. She can use the attack to gain a half-action move if she wishes instead, and it's extremely nice to have any melee character not have to remain in striking distance of the enemy at the end of the turn. Load her up with charge-granting traits, and Fighter Rosita is pretty good. Bruisers have an abundance of excellent traits including Lucky, Perseverance, Weaken, and Punish that all work well in coordination with each other. Badges should be damage reduction and health. Maybe you can make a killer bruiser, but it's not their natural niche. Great armor traits include Primed, Lucky, Tactical, and maybe Stun Resist, depending on who you're bringing and what you're facing. Weapons work well with Tactical, Concussion, Interrupt, and you really want weapons that can strike multiple targets. My faves include Luke's Mace, Rosita's Makwahit, and especially the Walker Herding Riot Shield. When it comes to assault heroes, the Governor is the most circumstantial hero. He makes for a great farmer. Put him in charge of a squad, and he must be in charge, and only the best means that your haul of supplies and XP and your chance of receiving higher level equipment from after mission creeps is boosted. None of this helps you win battles though, and stronger enemies and tougher missions grant better rewards by default anyway. If you're doing some casual farming, scavenge missions or the like, you may as well have Philip Blake in the top spot, but there are just many other heroes in every other class which are worth prioritising first. Rufus really relies on there being a threat counter in a mission because the modest health boost his Squirrel's Courage leadership trait grants isn't worth much. It's entirely circumstantial, but if you do have a threat counter with a quick turnover, he's sometimes actually pretty useful as a leader. If you're playing Last Stand, he really can actually be a benefit. Abraham Ford, we all love him, but the Bitch Nuts leadership trait provides a modest boost to health and damage. It's nice to have, but the benefits are pretty marginal, and there are simply much better heroes to choose from. Rosita has a slightly odd double characteristic leadership trait with deadly tactics. Hit a single enemy and you cause significant additional damage. Hit multiple enemies and you get a half point of movement. Either of these is pretty good, but that extra movement that lets you get into position, fire and retreat can really come in handy. Stick her as leader and your people can move around really freely, but she's not the other two yet to be mentioned in this class. Princess's Royal Rampage is dependent on targets being afflicted with a status effect, crippling, ensnared, stunned and so on. Your best weapons for any class are going to do this, and ideally you're inflicting those effects on multiple enemies per turn, so this caveat shouldn't be a problematic requirement. Hit these enemies and you cause a little extra damage, and more importantly, you can gain a charge point. That's a really big deal, and she is a great leader or team member. However, there's somebody else in this class who really stands out. It's Mercer. Man-at-Arms has a pretty decent chance of inflicting a percentage of the enemy's current hit points as additional damage. It's a phenomenal ability, making him incredibly effective against even the toughest enemies before they've even taken a hit. He's a hard counter to Commonwealth walkers and those that are resistant to ranged fire. And if you have Sasha in the lead and Yumiko as backup, Mercer makes the third team member in the greatest of all time No Man's Land squad. Ruthless and Lucky are the best traits for your assault characters. Marksman's are nice to have too. Badges should boost damage and critical damage. Armor should have Lucky and Ruthless too, plus Primed and Charging are top picks. Weapons benefit from widespread or other blast type effects that maximize the weapon's chance to hit multiple enemies, or extend the weapon's traditionally paltry range. Lucky, Concussive, Ensnare and or Cripple are very effective here too. The Hazard Shotgun, Rosita's Assault Rifle and the Champion Assault Rifle are great weapons, but the Decimator really shines as the best weapon for this class. Finally, warriors have some really interesting characters, and Jerry. In fact, I'm creating a special ranking category here, and it has one person in it. It's the opposite of S tier. It's Jerry tier. Let's simply shake our heads and move on. Jesus' hand-to-hand is kind of similar to Abraham's leadership trait, creating a small boost for damage and health for melee characters. It ain't enough to make a difference to anything, mind, it's not too useful. I'm still not going to put him in the Jerry tier jail though, nobody deserves that. Michonne's Thinning the Herd provides a chance to reduce threat upon killing an enemy, as well as potentially regaining an action point. It's partially circumstantial. What if the mission doesn't have a threat counter, and you can't rely on getting that kill and extra action point? It does make for a generally useful leadership trait, but I think we have 3 more reliable choices in this class. Beta has a wonderfully characterful trait in One with the Herd. Pass a walker and it'll follow you like a puppy, not attacking you on the subsequent turn or anything. You also have a chance to get a charge point with every walker you do this with, so when you are ready to cut them down, you probably can. This works on all team members, not just melee classes. It doesn't however work on goos, spikies or tanks. That's a pretty big neg trait, but Beta still makes for a very interesting and often very useful character, especially on missions where you gotta get somewhere and there's walkers in the way. Tyrese has one of those leadership traits that inflicts a set percentage of the enemy's health as damage. Use a charge attack and Made to Suffer kicks in, creating a debuff circle that also reduces enemy movement to 1 square per turn. It really lets you control the enemy, making them have to linger in a space they're going to take persistent damage. It's very good, but perhaps even better is the final character's trait. When I did my first hero guide, I figured Ezekiel wasn't really a top tier hero. Regal Authority grants a preemptive strike before an incoming attack lands. Surely the primed armor trait and good team placing abrogates that. Well, in game, this is just a lot more useful than it may seem. A condition may be that wielding a mace type weapon really makes this leadership trait sing, but then maces are just incredible warrior weapons anyway, and you kind of want to just be bringing them no matter what. The best warrior traits include Lucky and Ruthless, surprisingly enough, as well as Weaken and Persistence. Badges should emphasize damage and critical damage. Lucky, Ruthless, Primed and Tactical can be pretty great on warrior armor. Weapons should really be hitting as many targets as possible, so Wide Arc or the inherent ability of most unique weapons to do this are worth checking out. Ensnare, Tactical, Interrupt, Lucky, they're all great traits to have on warrior weapons. The Chainsaw and Dragon's Tongue are pretty great, but maces really change what warriors can do. For example, coupled with Ezekiel's leadership trait, you can stun hordes of enemies and make it very difficult for them to touch you at all when you use these things correctly. There's one more type of survivor in each class, the non-named guys who weren't characters in the show, civvies as I call them. They have 5 trait slots and no unique leadership trait. That's not as exciting as our named heroes, but then not every leadership trait is that great. You can configure civvies however you wish, and a huge factor is that class tokens are way more common than character-specific tokens. Your civvies are likely to get a high rarity level more quickly than the guys from the show, and there's also other considerations. Non-named heroes are always available in Last Stand on Expert when there's a limited roster of characters to choose from, and sometimes it's civvies who start charged in challenges. Having a leveled up no-name in every class is well worth it. So that's how I would rate the heroes. There's factors like mission type, squad composition, weapon choices, current rarity level, hell, even personal preference that comes into play. But if you have any thoughts, comments and opinions, please do let me know. As ever, thank you for watching.